Right now,
Uh,
I feel like I'm in political exile, Dan. I
yeah,
actually do not want to return to my country. I do not. I love my country. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go home. I feel
it's
like anything I do or
terrifying.
say would cause me to get locked up.
Absolutely. And Calvin, we're all so concerned about our liberty. We're concerned about our ability to make money because there is so much pressure now coming on the social media companies. So effectively, what the government and mainstream media are conspiring to do is shut down the ability for Brits to access information in the way that they choose. It is chilling. It is terrifying. A retired 61-year-old former train driver from Sutton has become the latest victim of two-tier care's woke Stasi. Now, David Spring, he has been jailed for 18 months. But he hasn't been jailed for violence, but for hurty words. So while attending the Whitehall demonstration after the Southport massacre 2 weeks ago to, in his words, complain about people being put up in hotels, he shouted abuse at the police officers and joined the tasteless chant, "Who the F is Allah, Allah, Allah," which is a popular song at some of these marches, according to the mainstream media. Now, this is behaviour he's very embarrassed about. In fact, he says he's ashamed about. He's apologised. This is a man of exemplary character. Previously, anyway. He's the full-time carer for his ill wife. But he was sent down immediately by the judge, who was instituting authoritarian slippery Starmer's approach of zero tolerance for free speech. As the Conservative commentator Chris Rose posted on X, 18 months for this? Meanwhile, shouting intifada equals no arrest. Shouting F the Jews, F their mothers, rape their daughters equals the charges dropped by the CPS. The genocidal from the river to the sea slogan against Jews projected onto Big Ben equals no arrests. A similar theme from Maya Tusi, who juxtaposed the story of the Sutton man with a headline that read, "All charges over convoy who shouted rape Jewish daughters are dropped." Maya then added, 2 headlines, 2 legal judgments, 2-tier country. This is the United Kingdom. There are so many of these stories in the UK now where free speech is dead. Take this man. And Darren Grimes told his story today by writing, "I honestly can't believe what I've just read." Sellafield worker Lee Joseph Dunn was given a prison sentence after appearing at Carlisle Magistrates Court for sharing 3 Facebook posts. Prosecutor George Shelley explained the posts showed groups of Asian men with captions like "coming to a town near you after hopping off a small boat," and "when it's on your turf, then what?" One image even depicted a man wielding knives in front of the Palace of Westminster. As Darren says, let's be clear, none of these posts incite violence, which should be the only threshold for jailing someone over their speech. But here we are, tossing someone in prison for expressing a few, however controversial, views. Even if you disagree with what Dunn posted, you should be deeply concerned by this new totalitarianism. What will you do if one day your own speech is deemed hate speech by this ever-expanding definition? It's not hyperbole to say that free speech in Britain is on life support. And Sly News has seemingly been celebrating a 12-year-old being caught up in the legal system as a result of the riots. 12 years old, come on. Responding to Northamptonshire police sending down a young man for social media posts, our guest today, Father Calvin Robinson, wrote, "Knife crime is at an all-time high in the UK. Our country has major problems with burglary, fraud, domestic violence. Remember when governments used to encourage the police to address these issues, like the war on drugs? Well, now we have a war on hurty words on social media." This is all so over the top. Also over the top. There are so many stories. What about Lucy Connolly? The wife of a Conservative councillor. She is behind bars on remand because of her social media posts. That is an indignity usually reserved for violent criminals who pose an ongoing danger to the public. As Sean B.W. wrote, remand should only be used if the suspect is likely to commit further suspected crimes. What would Lucy Connolly do? Another exasperated post inspired by the murder of 3 girls in Southport? This is pre-trial deterrence and surely an abuse of the judicial process. How can our media and our political elites not realize that this is nuts? And it's sowing further discontent, because punishing rioters for violence is one thing, but these trumped up charges based on angry social media posts represents a very slippery slope. Thank God our American friends seem to realize what's happening. Here's Ted Cruz.
Free speech is under assault. In the United Kingdom, they are sentencing people to jail for social media posts. It is tragic. The Magna Carta is on fire. And the question is this coming to America? The United Kingdom is threatening to go after Americans, including Elon Musk, who they're targeting directly, and try to prosecute them for free speech. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz embrace the same radical views.
The Magna Carta is on fire. Think about that. Think about our reputation around the world. And what's most shocking is that when Tutia Keir was Director of Public Prosecutions, failing to press charges against BBC paedophile Jimmy Savile, by the way, but when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, he actually seemed to believe in free speech. Listen.
Where a communication is, as it were, merely offensive, grossly offensive, etc., then principles of free speech and free expression require there to be a high threshold and dictate that a prosecution is unlikely to be in the public interest in many of those cases.
And the factors which will suggest people might not be prosecuted include things like deleting it quickly if you've sobered up in the morning. Can you explain about that?
One thing that's very important in this area is that where free speech protects the subject matter, a prosecution must be proportionate. And when considering whether a prosecution is proportionate, the question of whether a communication is removed quickly, whether the individual expresses remorse, whether access to the communication is blocked, these are obviously relevant to any assessment of proportionality.
And will it be more or less likely for individuals to be prosecuted criminally now when they're using Twitter or Facebook, do you think?
It's not possible to say whether it's more or less likely. There simply haven't been enough cases. But this is clearly signalling that in those cases that are protected by freedom of expression, then there's a double safeguard, a high threshold, and consideration of the public interest before a prosecution will be brought.
So what has happened to that Keir Starmer? Well, let me tell you, power corrupts. Two-tier Keir knows he can't solve the very real challenges facing the UK with his hard left policy prescription by throwing open the borders. So he'll just try and shut up his rivals and work with a compliant mainstream media who also want to censor social media and free speech to save their own dying asses. It's so wrong. And we must not blindly accept this sort of extremism. But now it's time to bring in today's outsider, Father Calvin Robinson. And Father Calvin, you really are an outsider today because you're coming to us from outside the United Kingdom. I won't reveal where, but there you are with Lawrence Fox and Father on a boat. But you're working hard, and I so appreciate you joining us because obviously, Calvin, my goodness, this is now becoming so serious that you have American senators like Ted Cruz who understand the importance of freedom of speech talking about the Magna Carta being on fire. I presume you agree.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think it's fantastic that we have so many Americans speaking out in support to help us, because there's going to come a time where our voices are silenced. It feels like there's a massive clampdown on anyone on the centre-right or the right wing of politics in the United Kingdom. We're seeing people not just banned from social media these days, but sent to prison and a rush through the court system too. You know, at the same time as we can't get paedophiles, rapists, murderers, or burglars pushed through the court system. Somehow they find a way to push through people who write hurting words on social media. So I feel like we're going to come to a time when people like you and I are going to be silenced. So we're going to need voices in America to stand up for us and to help us, because at least they've enshrined their protections to free speech in their law, which we do not really have in this country.
No, it's absolutely terrifying what's going on. And I want to talk a lot about the idea of potentially a blasphemy law coming in by the back door in just a moment. But first, Calvin, can we speak about David Spring, right? Jailed for 18 months for hurty words at this Whitehall demonstration. Calvin, a guy of perfect character in the past. He wasn't violent. He didn't join in any of the attacks on the police. He was part of a couple of these tasteless chants. But jailing him for 18 months, retiree, 61 years old, when he's the full-time carer for his wife, who is ill, to me, Calvin, this is a country losing the plot.
It is, absolutely. I'm no expert in the law, but when I read this case and I see there are so many caveats in the judge's words when he says this could cause or some people might, it's always like, well, who are these people and when would this happen? And in fact, what they're doing is he didn't actually get arrested for saying what the chant. It's actually for inciting or potential to incite. And there's nothing wrong with the chant. I want to know the answer to the question, who the F is Allah? Who the F is Allah? It's a fair question to ask. And if that's going to cause people to get arrested, then I'm going to keep parroting it until they can come and arrest me too. Because it's not fair, it's not right, it's not English to arrest someone for saying...
Because who decides? Who decides? Because, Calvin, imagine if we started to bang up every member of the pro-Hamas marchers who had chanted from the river to the sea. Now, personally, I don't want that to happen. I'm a free speech absolutist, but lots of people feel that from the river to the sea is a genocidal chant which is inciting violence. So this is why I think it's such a slippery slope.
I heard that just the other day. I'm staying in Oxford, well, not at the moment, but in general, I'm staying in Oxford. I walked down the street and I saw a load of Mohammedans shouting from the river to the sea. They'd clearly just been to mosque. In fact, I walked around the corner and saw their mosque and they were all fighting each other outside the mosque, which I thought, symptomatic of the state of the country that we're in right now. But the fact that they could say that and get away with it. In fact, I've heard people say genocide to the Jews, kill all Jews in the center of our capital city and get away with it. But if you and I tweet something that is slightly right-wing, we could potentially be arrested. So I think when Keir Starmer gets up there and says, I believe in free speech, we've got to set a high criteria, what he's talking about there is protecting the free speech of people who agree with him for the approved narrative. For the rest of us, he wants to silence us because there is no political argument against what we're saying. We are speaking the truth. And his only thing that he can do is shut us down.
And what he's got, Calvin, is a supine mainstream media who are on his side. And why he's been quite clever, or why he thinks he's been quite clever, is what he's doing, Calvin, behind the scenes is reassuring the mainstream media, reassuring the newspapers, reassuring the broadcasters, oh, this isn't about you. We believe in freedom of the speech when it comes to a free press. But the problem is, Calvin, you can't trust the mainstream media. Imagine if we'd listened to the mainstream media narrative over COVID. It was brave folk on social media speaking out against the narrative that was actually able to turn things around.
Yes, and as a German Lutheran bishop once said, at first they came for the socialists. I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the communists. I did not speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came up for me, and there was no one to speak up because no one was left. And that's exactly where we're going to find ourselves if the complicit mainstream media keep going along with this, and if people on the centre-left keep going along with this, celebrating when people are cancelled, arrested, charged, and rushed into prison, rushed through the system, sent to prison. If they keep celebrating when it happens to their opponent, one day it will happen to them too. It's so short-sighted. We need to wake people up and say, free speech works for me, but it also works for you. It's important for us all.
Exactly. And they shouldn't be arrogant, Calvin, because journalists actually have no enshrined rights in the law. So if you can arrest a citizen for a tweet, you can also arrest a journalist for the same thing. But some of these people who have been locked up, Calvin, seem to have been making political points. That's what I don't understand. So if you look at the work of Lee Joseph Dunn, who Darren Grimes spoke about, 18 months, I think he got at the Carlisle Crown Court, he shared 3 Facebook posts. Now, let's just look into these Facebook posts, Calvin. Some people might think they're tasteless. Some people might think they're rude. But I cannot see how they are illegal. One showed a group of Asian men with the caption, coming to a town near you after hopping off a small boat. Another one said, when it's on your turf, then what? One image depicted men wielding knives in front of the Palace of Westminster. Oh, can that, Calvin, be an incitement to violence in some way if it's just a picture? I'm not sure.
I mean, we have to be very clear on this. Incitement to violence means you're calling people to violence. We've always known what that meant until now. Now they're saying it could be perceived as incitement to violence, or some people could potentially be angry and cause offence and therefore be inspired to violence from this. And what they're doing is they're twisting the wording. They're playing semantics on purpose. Because you and I know that if we say, okay, let's go and get our knives, let's go cause trouble, that's an incitement to violence. If I say, actually, there are too many people coming over our shores, flooding our shores, people who are military-aged men, what is going on? That is not an incitement to violence, but they don't like it. They find it offensive. Therefore, they call it hateful. And because they call it hateful, they say it could inspire hatred in others and therefore potentially cause incitement to violence. They're jumping through loopholes, mental gymnastics, in order to arrest people for saying things they do not like. Right now, I feel like I'm in political exile, Dan. I actually do not want to return to my country. I love my country. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go home. I feel like anything I do or say would cause me to get locked up.
Absolutely. And Calvin, we're all so concerned about our liberty. We're concerned about our ability to make money because there is so much pressure now coming on the social media companies. So effectively, what the government and mainstream media are conspiring to do is shut down the ability for Brits to access information in the way that they choose. It is chilling. It is terrifying. And look, things are bad in some ways in the US, but even under a democratic government for the past 4 years, they would never consider this sort of madness. And I understand, because I've thought lots of things in my head, Calvin. I'm like, am I going to have to move overseas in order to be able to broadcast to the UK? And then I've also thought, Calvin, what are they going to do, these social media platforms, when this new law comes in? Because, by the way, these new laws, these chilly new laws that Starmer wants to introduce, the idea of harmful but legal speech and social media companies having to be able to remove it, that doesn't protect Tucker Carlson or Megyn Kelly or Steve Bannon or Dave Rubin or Dan Bongino or Ben Shapiro just because they're broadcasting from the US. So are we really going to be in a situation where platforms that believe in free speech, like X and like Rumble, will not be able to operate in the UK? They would have to geo-block, which would make us like China, like North Korea, like Russia. And mark my words, that's what these laws are designed to do. First, though, what's so important about being independent is I'm only ever going to tell you about products that I use and truly believe in, and Verso is one of them. I've entered my 40s, so staying healthy is really important to me. I exercise virtually every day, wasn't very good over the weekend, had a few drinks, but usually I'm doing the 16-8 fast. I have lost weight. However, scientists like David Sinclair have proven we can now reverse aging with interventions that go beyond healthy habits. So I wanted a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, one that's backed up by solid evidence. I cannot tell you how good Cell Being by Verso is. That's the name of the product, Cell Being. It has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging. It does that by increasing the NAD+ levels. Now, NAD+, that's the thing that powers every cell in your body. For me, the product has been transformative. Fasting is so much easier. I've lost fat. I'm eating less too. And that's because it has blood sugar regulating effects in the product, which actually lead to fewer cravings. It really helps with sleep too and energy. So this is a brilliant anti-aging product. The really helpful thing to know too is that Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced to guarantee you are getting what you paid for. And I'm very excited to say an amazing offer today. If you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order. All you need to do is use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. The link is available in our YouTube and Rumble description. But to repeat, buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN.
I mean, they're already doing it in practice. Just this week, I had one of my videos demonetized on YouTube. I looked to which one it was. It was an interview I had with Tommy Robinson, where I sat down with him and asked him so many deep questions to find out about his history. You know, is he a racist? What was EDL? Why did he set it up? All questions that people want to know, or I believe that people wanted to know the answers to. YouTube took it off, said this cannot be monetized because it's with a dangerous individual. Like, what's dangerous about information? What's dangerous about asking the person, what does he truly believe in? Like, they could say, well, you're inciting violence if you're saying, okay, get out on the streets and cause violence. But if you're just having a conversation with someone, it can't do that. So on the one hand, they're already taking away the opportunity for individualism and individual journalism and actual civil journalism away from the mainstream media and the legacy media who are corrupt. They're taking away our opportunities. On the other side, they're clamping down on the platforms themselves. We know that EU is pushing legislation on Ireland, which will clamp down on Twitter, because of course Twitter is the focus not just of the EU, but of also the Labour government right now, because it's one of the few free speech platforms. And if this hate crime bill goes through in Ireland, what it essentially means is they will censor Twitter for the whole of Europe. They have that power because Twitter, for most of us Europeans, is based in Ireland. That's where their business is. And so Twitter in the United States and Twitter in the rest of the world will have a very different infrastructure to what we have in the European Union. Well, even though we're not in the European Union, they still have that power to censor it. So everyone, all of your viewers, need to get themselves a VPN. We need to find a way to protect ourselves from Big Brother, who does want to lock down not just us as individuals and as journalists, but also the big tech companies and the few that provide free speech. They want to control those too.
But where they're so deluded, Calvin, and history should teach them this, is by silencing folk and by banning them from accessing information, all you are going to do is create an entire class of people who are so angry about the system that actually they want revolution. Daylight is the best disinfectant. And the thing is, Calvin, this never used to be the British way. Actually, if you go back in history and you look at the mainstream media, the BBC even used to broadcast very respectable interviews with the likes of Diana Mosley, who was the famous so-called fascist who never really completely disassociated herself with Adolf Hitler during her life, but she would still go on flagship BBC programs like Desert Island Discs and have a respectful interview, because the BBC back in the days where they believed in free speech actually knew that you needed to have discussions with these types of people. This BBC would never consider interviewing Tommy Robinson unless it was a complete gotcha interview.
But this is part of the problem, isn't it? So the vast swathe of the people in our country want to see both sides of the argument, so they want to be able to make up their minds for themselves. And that's the way it used to be in the media. The media used to put forward the information and then we discern it. And now we've gotten to a point where it feels like the media is shoveling woke ideology down our throats, but also a very centre-left to far-left ideology at all times, depending on the outlet. And so we're not just given the information, we're given a very clear bias. There's lots of prejudice in all of the stuff they're showing with us. So there's a disconnect now between the mainstream.
Well, David Spring being described, Calvin, in all of these articles as a fact, as a far-right thug. How dare you, number one? How dare you? This is a guy who made one mistake in his life. He did nothing violent. He worked an entire honest life as a train driver. He's a full-time carer for his wife. You can't just describe him as a far-right thug. You can't. And all you're doing is actually upsetting so many millions of people who are sick of being dismissed. And on that note, Calvin, that brings me to your row this week. I guess row part number, 999, with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who wrote this column in The Guardian, which got you mad, where he said, "Have no doubt far-right groups are unchristian and their use of our imagery is an outrage. Fairness, equality's ties that bind, that's what we seek now." But Calvin, you responded actually in a couple of ways, but you said perhaps if you really want to find a way to live together, calling ordinary Britons far right is not the best place to start. People are mourning, angry and frustrated. You should be a pastor in this moment, not a false accuser. Claiming Christianity as your own with exclusive language like our imagery is really not going to help your cause.
I find it frustrating, Dan, because this is the job. The job of this man is supposed to be the pastor for every single person in England. He is the first among equals in the Church of England. Whether you go to church or not, he is supposed to be there for you. And so when the nation is divided, as it is right now, and we're seeing people rioting on the streets, he should be there offering an alternative, saying, come to church. Doesn't matter what your politics is. Doesn't matter what your ethnic background is. Doesn't matter what your family background is. Come to church. We have a place for you. Instead, he is saying, you people out there, you're all far right. You are the problem. He's pointing fingers. His finger should be pointing inwards. He is part of the problem. The Archbishop of Canterbury has done more to divide this nation over COVID, saying that to love your neighbour is to take the vaccine, over Brexit, to say the country should not vote in favour of Brexit, over Rwanda, to say the far-right government pushing Rwanda is inhumane. Like every single step of the way, he further divides the nation. What he needs to realise is most people in this country are small c conservative in some way, shape or form. Most people have strong British values and some cultural Christianity at the very least. And so when he tries to say, you're using our imagery, it's like, wait a minute, who are you? Who's our? we're all included in this. This is all of ours. It's not, Jesus Christ belongs to every single person in the world, not just the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is not the CEO of the church. He's not the boss man. He's just the first among equals amongst bishops. And I think he's forgotten his place and thinks he is the opposition leader. I mean, where's the opposition? I hear Justin Welby more than I hear the opposition.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're going to come to that actually in just a moment, because of course the Conservative Party, their big move has been banning Nigel Farage. I just want to pick up on one thing though, Calvin. Actually, if you look at the polling, folk like Justin Welby couldn't be more out of touch. For the first time since 2016. What happened in 2016? We all know. We voted to leave the EU in large part because we wanted to take back control of our borders. But for the first time since then, Calvin, what is the number one issue that Brits are most concerned about? Immigration. So you can keep trying to say that to even have this discussion makes you far right. But there is a changing of the tide here in terms of public perception, and eventually it's going to be impossible for them to keep ignoring.
The Archbishop of Canterbury should be looking out for the meek and the lowly. He should be looking out for every single person, no matter their class or status. And it often feels to me like he's looking out for his own. He's part of that metropolitan liberal elite bubble. He lives in the Lambeth Palace, literally a stone's throw from Westminster Palace. He's always around there. It feels like he's a politician among politicians. We know that Boris Johnson used to run around his garden. They used to jog together. These people are too chummy. The church should be holding the politicians to account, just as the media should be holding the politicians to account. And actually, the faith teaches that we're all sinners and we're all welcome in God's house, and especially people who are concerned about immigration, because God ordained nations and tribes. He set us apart for different reasons, with different cultures and different experiences, for his own intention. Who are we to say we want to be one world government, one global people, one world religion? That is wrong. Not many people want that approach. So the WEF lot, including Justin Welby, who is a member of the WEF, should butt out and let ordinary British folk go back to ordinary British values and conserve our Christianity in the way that we know and love.
But Calvin, they're all in this together. We know that. This is slippery Starmer, who literally said on the record that he would prefer to be in Davos than Westminster, which says everything about this guy's priorities. But look, we have to sometimes see light in these situations. And the brilliant comedian Andrew Lawrence, who I've just become so obsessed with over the past few weeks, because he seems to be the only comic in the country who is actually portraying the madness of what's going on. And actually, that's what comedians are meant to do, right? They're meant to take crazy everyday situations and turn them into things that can make us smile and laugh. Well, he has now had a brilliant take on the unfairness of all of these folk being arrested and locked up.
I'd like to apologise to anyone to whom I've caused hurty feelings with my jokes. I do understand that jokes about the political, legal and cultural establishment are now a criminal offence in communist Britain. I am aware that under the Equalities Act 2010, as a straight white male living in conventional family circumstances, working, paying taxes and raising a child, I'm very much a second-class citizen in Keir Starmer's Britain, and that the police and judiciary do have the right to flagrantly discriminate against me wherever they see fit to do so. In the future, I promise to follow standard-approved BBC guidelines for comedians, which advises removing all punchlines from material before presenting it for public approval. I've let myself down, I've let multicultural Britain down, and in the interests of diversity, I promise to do better. I appreciate your support at this difficult time.
Do you know what, Calvin? He's so good. He's launched a Patreon, actually, so I've decided today I've got to go and support this guy because he's so funny. But look, it is not an exaggeration to say, Calvin, that we now have politicians and media figures who are lobbying to get commentators and journalists arrested for speaking the truth. And I think the most egregious example of that over the past couple of days has been the push by Alistair Campbell and Hope Not Hate, the ironically named charity, to get Douglas Murray banged up. And I thought you'd be particularly interested, actually, in one portion from the interview where Murray is talking about Hamza Yusef, or Useless, as I call him, Scotland's worst ever politician. And this has been described as hate speech. And this is all about, I think, Calvin, the creeping idea that there will be a definition of Islamophobia that will be illegal and the idea that a blasphemy law is coming in through the back door. So have a look at what Douglas Murray had to say. This was an interview from 9 months ago, and then I'll get you to respond off the back.
The man who ended up becoming First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Yusef, is a very openly practicing Muslim and had himself photographed on his first day in office with a group of other Muslims doing the Islamic prayers in the First Minister's office, bending to Mecca. If Kate Forbes had become leader and promptly posted a photograph of her and some others taking Holy Communion, I think it would have been an uproar. So why would that have been the case, but no uproar for Hamza Yusef doing the Islamic prayers in the office? Because we want everybody to have religious freedom except ourselves. We want to praise every tradition apart from our own. And we want to promote every belief system other than the one that got us here. That is madness.
Calvin, they want him arrested for that.
Of course they do, for the very point that he's making. They want to prove him right. He's spot on. This is one of the reasons I do what I do, is because of people like Douglas Murray. He's so good at articulating the problem. And right now, we live in a country where we have so many issues, from knife crime to burglary to fraud to Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. We have so many issues that politicians cannot address. They are incompetent and incapable of addressing the problems. So instead, they attack the people who are raising awareness of the problems. And this has been a common thread that we're seeing for the last month since Labour got into office, over a month now. And so they will continue to attack people like Douglas Murray, people like yourself and me, and they will continue to shut us down and silence us because they cannot approach the issue. And Douglas Murray is absolutely right. If Kate Forbes, a good Christian woman, had got into office as the First Minister of Scotland, there is no way on earth anyone in the mainstream media would have been happy with her praying or receiving Holy Communion as her first act of service. And not to forget, Hamza Yusef actually he segregated the men from the women and got his rugs on the floor and got his bum in the air straight away. People didn't seem to take issue with him being misogynistic in that way because it's an exotic faith. There's an old-fashioned, almost racist attitude to anything that's foreign or exotic. It must be held to a different standard. Whereas Christianity is because it's our own, we can look down our noses at it. But anything that's Mohammedan or a different faith, we should just encourage it and support it blindly. It doesn't matter what they do, and that's wrong. All religions, all faiths, all cultures should be held to the same high standard in this country. And if they fall below that standard, we should get rid of them. And Islam, unfortunately, falls below that standard. Segregating men and women in that way falls below that standard. The way they treat gays falls below that standard. The way they treat women who can't be educated, can't drive cars, falls below that standard. From the very foundation of that faith, set up by a prophet who proclaims to marry someone at 6 and consecrate that marriage at 9, falls far below our standards. Every single person in the West should be disgusted at that fact. But they turn a blind eye because it's foreign, it's exotic. We cannot hold it to the same degree.
Well, not only do they turn a blind eye, Calvin, they literally want to make an exchange like this illegal. Yeah. And Christopher Hitchens warned of that 14 years ago. He warned that this is where we were heading. The right ignored him, so they did nothing to enshrine free speech in the UK. And now we have Sadiq Khan, unfortunately one of the most powerful politicians in the country, lobbying Keir Starmer to institute exactly that sort of law. By the way, Calvin, I also wanted just to talk to you briefly about Alistair Campbell without a hint of self-awareness, comparing Douglas Murray to Goebbels, when, of course, there was only one of those two men who used Nazi-style propaganda to lead the country into a war. But I'll put her out to one side. What actually impressed me, and I'm not always impressed by the Spectator, Calvin, because I think a lot of the time, that very establishment, they describe folk like Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson as trolls this week who they want to ignore. So I certainly don't back everything the Spectator does. But what I did really respect is that the editor, Fraser Nelson, came out, backed Douglas Murray publicly and said, we will not lose one of our star columnists because of a hate mob on X. And I just thought, Calvin, wouldn't it have been great if that had been the response from the management of GB News over yourself and myself and Lawrence Fox? Because the Spectator, I think, can claim to be a free speech publication because of that reaction. But as soon as GB News gave in to the mob, they absolutely cannot say that they are for free speech because they're not.
No, I was looking through some old documents for Discovery for GB News the other day, and I saw a text message from one of their board members who was a chairman for a while, who said, "As long as I'm on the board, your job is safe. Don't you worry about it." I just found it hilariously ironic because, of course, our jobs were not safe there, and there's no such thing as free speech there. I do, like you, encourage and support the Spectator for backing Douglas Murray in this. And actually, I like the Spectator in the same way that I like Nigel Farage, in that sometimes they align with our values, and that's very good when they do, but often they play the game very safely to remain part of the establishment, to get invited to the right parties with the right people. And when they call people like Katie Hopkins far-right thugs or whatever it is, the trolls, whatever it is, they're playing that game well to say, I'm one of you still. Please keep me in the members club. Please keep inviting me to the private parties. I'm still one of you. I'm not far-right like them. They other people, and it's not nice, but I do support them when they do something good. And backing Douglas Murray is always a good thing.
Yeah, they sort of run the private members club, don't they? The Spectator. But look, Calvin, at the same time as all of this is going on, the mainstream media are treating completely separately the story of record boat arrivals to this country, even though I think the two things are completely aligned. But they obviously want to say, no, you've got the one story about the riots and about the discontent, and then you have the second story about the boats. But here's how Sly News revealed the shocking figures.
Let me just bring you a bit of an update on those provisional figures from the Home Office that we brought you a little bit earlier on. They are saying this morning that 703 migrants were detected crossing the English Channel yesterday. Now, that would be the highest number on a single day since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, and the third highest daily number so far this year. They are saying that the cumulative number of arrivals by small boats so far this year stands at a provisional total of 18,342. And they say that this is 13% higher than the total at the equivalent point last year, which was 16,170, but 3% lower than the total at this stage the year before that.
And there was also this shock reporting, Calvin, from GB News.
In their efforts to end the Channel migrant crisis. Row after row of small boats, hundreds of them, many now deflated and rolled up. As we filmed, contractors dropped off more dinghies, the latest to have made the illegal crossing into UK waters. This is Rishi Sunak! Sir Keir Starmer's focus is on going after the people smugglers, who've now sent thousands more migrants across the Channel since Labour came to power.
I mean, it's a terrible situation, Calvin, but don't you find it interesting that the mainstream media want to treat this as two separate stories when actually they're completely connected, right?
The more boats come over, the more illegal immigrants, undocumented illegal immigrants come over, the more we see our crime rates rise, the more people are going to get upset. Thankfully, the riots have stopped, but I wish the protests would continue. I'll be very clear here that I do not condone violence at all. But I think the British people need to make our voices heard, in that enough is enough. And actually, it's not just for us, it's for everyone. A couple of people died crossing the Channel in the last week on one of these illegal dinghies. And I thought that the blood is on the hands of every single Liberal who supported open border, who supported these gangsters, these people smugglers that are shipping people over illegally, because it's unsafe for everyone involved. It's unsafe for the British people not knowing who's coming over our shores, but it's unsafe for the people making that perilous journey. And so it's right to stop it. It's right to clamp down. It's right to control our borders. And saying that is not racist, saying that is not far right, it's just common sense. And so the British people need to get back on the streets. We need to get back to protesting. We need to make sure the government hear our voice. We cannot let them psyop us or gaslight us and silence us. So many people think that big 100 far-right riots was cancelled by Hope Not Hate. Like, no, that was orchestrated. That was a psyop by the government and Hope Not Hate in order to make it look like they're in control. They're not in control. We are in control.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.